Welcome everyone. My name is Doris Correa and I am the editor-in-chief of Íkala, revista de lenguaje y cultura, a journal published by the School of Languages at Universidad de Antioquia. Today is a very special occasion since we get to meet and have a chat with the guest editors of our latest special issue on decoloniality in ELT. The issue is titled Decoloniality in ELT, The South Writes Back, and contains articles in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. Our guest editors are three well-known scholars in the field of ELT. Dr. Carmen Helena Guerrero, Nieto, for Universidad Distrital Francisco José de Caldas in Bogotá, Colombia. Dr. Clarissa Menezes Jordão from Universidad Federal de Paraná in Curitiba, Brazil. And Dr. Gabriela Veronelli from the Center for Global Studies and the Humanities at Duke University in North Carolina, United States. They have accepted to meet with us and answer some of our most pressing questions about decoloniality in general and the articles that compose this issue in particular. We thank you very much, professors, for being here today and for taking the time to have a conversation with us about this very thorny topic that concerns all of us in the field of English language teaching, and which has all of us wondering what to do now that the ELT field has, no doubt, taken this decolonial turn. What this implies for us as teachers of colonial language, and so on. To elucidate these issues, we have prepared a set of 5 questions, and I would like to start with the most basic and general one, and then zoom in from there. That question is, this issue is titled Decoloniality in ELT, The South Writes Back. Why an issue on decoloniality in English language teaching now?
Okay, I will start. Thank you very much, Doris, for the introduction, and a big thank to my 2 collaborators, to Clarissa and Gabriela, for the hard work during this issue. So to answer this first question, I will talk from my, let's say, place as a Colombian scholar, so knowing the Colombian context. And I would like to start by saying, well, something that I have said somewhere else, and is that the ELT field is a largely and deeply colonized field. We have been very obedient, or we were very obedient for many years in following the mandates of the, let's say, Anglo-American dictates on the field, on what we had to teach, how we should pronounce, what varieties of English should be included in even the research agendas that we adopted were those mandated by the global north. And we just need to take a look at some programs of study even today, and see some of the subjects that are British and American culture, for example, or British and American literature. So as I said earlier, we have been very obedient, but there was like recently some Colombian scholars started to shake the field and bring ideas in critical pedagogy, critical discourse analysis, critical theory, critical applied linguistics. And so we started to look at the teaching of English and the field from a different perspective. And that, in my opinion, has paved the path towards this issue in decoloniality, because today what we found is that there are many Colombian scholars interested in exploring the issues, but from decolonial lens. Decoloniality in ELT is very recent in Colombia. And just like very few years ago, we started to get acquainted with decoloniality from the perspective of Latin American thinkers. And so I think this issue now makes sense to gather all these voices, Latin American voices, particularly in this issue, Brazilian and Colombian, to put together and to start given another direction to the field, particularly in my opinion, is to owning the field and being active agents in what has to be said, done, and how it should be done in ELT in Colombia. So I think that's a need to have this issue today. So and I also want to say that I celebrate that Íkala has opened this opportunity for all these scholars to be heard through their articles.
Helena, that was beautiful. I think if I would like to add something, and that comes from my experience as a decolonial scholar, is that there is an understanding of decolonial studies that as if they were trendy, you know, something that people are doing now in the academy, and that's what we are doing. I decided in my own, you know, way of engaging my colleagues, not to get so much into that question, but just said that for us, it has not been a trend, but a political standing in how we want to teach English in Latin America. Right. But most importantly, and that's something that you see in the authors, what it means to them to be English language teachers in Latin America. So you know, and decoloniality, it is a perspective and a framework that allows them to raise those voices.
Mm-hmm. Can I add something as well? Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to extend Carmen's thanks to Íkala and to Gabriela and Carmen herself, because it was really a great pleasure to be working with you, and especially under this topic of ELT and decoloniality. So, but I'd like to think, I usually think of Brazil as an example for obvious reasons. That's where I am located, and that's the context I'm more familiar with. So speaking from where I stand at the moment, we have been facing a huge backlash in many different senses here in Brazil. Lacism has been left behind. You know, churches are mingling with state affairs. There has been a wave of conservatism, negationism. Minorities are being persecuted, women are being treated as inferior to men, etc., etc. I know this is happening in other places as well in the planet, and perhaps that is one of the reasons why we're so interested in decoloniality, not only in specifically in relation to ELT, but also, you know, if we look at this bigger picture. And I think that lots of people have felt the importance of changing this kind of backlash movement, and realizing that we need other ways to organize and understand our existence in the world. So it's what Boaventura de Souza Santos has been saying about how we need to find alternatives to capitalism, to patriarchalism, and to colonialism. So I think what decoloniality is so trendy, not because it is superficial or because it's just a trend that's going to pass. I think it has become of interest in this moment, and in relation to ELT also, because of the connections, as Carmen pointed out, the connections of ELT with globalization, capitalism, colonialism, and also patriarchalism. And these perspectives have been very violent. They have been trying to silence other perspectives. And I think decoloniality presents alternatives to the table of how we see languages in the world. So I think that's why we have an issue on decoloniality and ELT right now at this very moment.
Very, very good. Thank you so much for those insights. So in the title, you also use a subtitle, The South Writes Back. What did you mean by the South writes back? Who is the South? And why is there a need for the South to write back?
That's a nice question, and I would like to address it a little bit philosophically, right, in the meaning of the category, the South and the global South, because it is a category that we can think it as a meta category, right? Like a category that has appeared in the practice and studies of world affairs and world politics. It's a category that you see very present, for example, among climate change activists. So in general, the South does not refer, to just like land masses and waters that are at the south of the equator. So it's strictly not the hemispheric South. Instead, the term in its different meanings has been a rubric for decolonized nations broadly south of the old colonial centers of powers. So in this sense, the South, it is a grouping of countries and regions along socioeconomic and political characteristics, but importantly, is about the location in the colonial imperial history, right? So the South is the location of the colonized along the, over 500 years of the capital world systems that we have lived and experienced. So in that sense, it's really not a static category when one says South, but it's mostly a relational category that draws connections between sites and across times. And because of this, it does take different meanings, right? My idea is not to give a class here, but yes, at least tell you that for us, the meaning of South that speaks most to the three of us is that it stands for a space of resistance against neocolonial and neoliberal capitalism, like Clarissa was just mentioning, how it is felt in Brazil, right? Like, so engaging with the South in this world, we know with the term South, it's kind of reframing the meaning, right? Away from country-based perspectives and significantly speaking to what we explain in the introduction in terms of onto-epistemic experiences, right? Onto refers to the ontology, to the being, and epistemic refers to the knowledge, right? Like, so the experiences of beings and knowledges being colonized. When you hear global South, you hear global, right? Like, so you understand that this has to do with globalization, but it's an understanding of globalization that is anti-Eurocentric, right? And it's not only rejects the Eurocentric traditional understanding, but also tells you why we are rejecting it. And we are rejecting it because the international division in countries, that abstract national understanding of the world has very much been complicit with domination and expansion of capitalism. So it is like if it obscures oppression, right? So to speak from the South and the need that the South has in writing or in speaking, it is about not another perspective, right? Not just a cultural relativism, right? Is first a denunciation that the South has been silenced and second, what the South needs to say, right? So, and in ELT, Lena was just saying right now, right, it has been traditionally dominated by the global North. And that domination, not only, again, standardize what to teach English means, but again, it silences ways of teaching. So that's why the South needs to write back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like to think of the South as perhaps a metaphor for denouncing, yes, but also for making oppressed voices heard, right? So I think that if we think of the South as a metaphor rather than a location, it kind of encompasses the idea that there are Souths in the North, in the geographical North, and there are Norths in the geographical South. That helps me understand the concept a
but
little
that's
bit.
still a location, right? But anyway, that this
No,
has
no,
been
there
a
are,
dispute.
no, what I mean to say is that there are oppressed people in northern locations,
Mhm.
and there are oppressing people or in
Certainly,
southern
yeah.
locations. It's not something that you can say every voice in the South has been silenced or every voice in the North has been silencing.
Absolutely.
They are heterogeneous fields. So for me, if I look at it as a metaphor rather than a specific location, it helps me understand the possibilities, the different arrangements, that locations and metaphors themselves have.
Yeah, as you know, Clarissa, I will keep on pushing for the location, right? Like, because for me, location is not a geography, right? Location is a body. Location is a space from speaking.
Yeah, but
location
that's not how people usually,
well,
I think that sometimes people understand location as place rather than space.
Well, we don't, right? That's what I'm, so, but I definitely agree with you that if you think it of a space of resistance or a body of resistance, and as a marker or a metaphor, as you refer, for anti-hegemonic engagement, that can happen anywhere, right? Yeah. So I definitely agree with you that it's far away from a geographical understanding of the South, and therefore the reason to write back.
Yeah, I also would like to contribute to the discussion. I see the South as, again, our field, ELT, has been colonized. And usually in our schools of education, what we always read and study and apply is the knowledge produced in the global North and from these dominant ideologies. And I think when we say the South writes back, it's given us, who have been silenced for too long, the opportunity to also take part in the construction of our field. Because usually we have seen as mere instruments to deliver some ideas and ideologies. But when we say that we are positioned in this South, by extension, is like we are also positioned as in the zone of non-being. So whatever we produce has not been acknowledged or even listened to. So here is a great opportunity for us to show how we are, again, claiming ownership of this field of ELT, because at the end of the day, it is us, Colombian teachers, Brazilian teachers, Argentinian teachers, all the teachers in the peripheries who are teaching and who are dealing with this colonial language and who are finding ways of resisting coloniality, and also finding ways of making our voices heard. because not because it's a colonial language, we're going to deny the language, but we are embracing this language as our own language, you know. So that to me, that is the meaning also of the South Writes Back, putting our voices there.
Very well, thank you. You have mentioned several issues, and I wonder which of these issues do you see mentioned in this Íkala's special issue by the authors that participated?
Well, definitely the reader will find in our introduction, right, like in our editorial, a good and careful summary of the articles that are part of the issue. But I will say, as we have been talking about, right, like the issues that are important for the articles, for the authors, are about spaces and practices of teaching English in a way that is doesn't replicate what Helena was saying, like just the obedience, right, of how you should teach, and models that come usually, at least in the articles that are about Colombia, from the British Council, right? Like, but also a very clear political understanding of pedagogy, right? Like it's that English, teaching English language is also part of making our countries and our societies better. And that's one issue that you find, right? Like this political commitment as teachers with different, you know, experiences and put it in different ways. But you have this idea of the need to decolonize the teaching of foreign languages in general and of English in particular, to make our societies more just places. And they make a very interesting elaboration of that connection, right? That brings the classroom as part of the society, right? So breaking that line, definitely between theory and practice, but also definitely between the school and the society. Also, and I think Helena and Clarissa mentioned this, an important issue has to do with analyzing and denouncing and criticizing traditional models of English language teaching that have like, where English is reduced to a single standard version, or where they have very static ideas of what is culture. But as I was saying before, criticizing this because they see that that way of teaching and that educational policies are very much complicit with the spread of neoliberalism in our countries, right? So it's not just a criticism for the sake of criticizing, but a criticism that ties together ELT from the global north to neoliberal reforms and standards of education, and this idea of education is for the development or the success. So really you see all the authors from their experiences breaking down those models, but also being very explicit of why they want to bring them down. So in that sense, another thing that you find in the article is an array of exercises, assignments, syllabi, literature review, from where the readers can read a lot. They can learn a lot. You know, there's a lot of material being offered in this number that I can think definitely can travel across geographies, right? Like, it's not because it's teachers in Colombia talking about the conflicts and the politics of peace in Colombia is just for Colombia, right? Like these authors make a great effort in thinking decolonial in this sense of traveling to other places, locations in the South. So you can say there's this knowledge democracy, right, happening in the issue and being expressed by our authors. So let me stop there and see, you know, if Helena and Clarissa remembers like things, because those at least were the connections, you know, that really blew my mind. I learned a lot, you know, from doing this, from my colleagues, but also from the authors.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you both on this. And I think there is some sort of polyphony in the articles. They are not following one same a trend or one same theoretical perspective on decoloniality. They show how heterogeneous a field decoloniality can be. And this is very interesting. This, I think, brings up the all the excitement we had reading the articles, and among the three of us as well, you know, discussing and disagreeing at times, which I think that just shows how interesting it is to be in contact with different perspectives, although we have similar readings, similar theoretical background, but still we disagree, we interpret things differently, we live things differently. And I think this issue shows that very clearly when we start reading, you know, the different papers. So that is one of the major issues that the whole issue brings about to me, and that I find really fascinating.
And I would like to add also that something that I found fascinating too is that the way that language policies, especially the ones related to English in Colombia, were aimed at producing one way of speaking English and using English in a very structural way, a very distant, very like just repeating patterns and saying nonsense sentences, for example. But then what we found in this issue is that the authors are not really paying attention to that they are more embracing this Freire's idea of language is to talk about the world. And in these issues, what we find in all in the different articles is different takes on how researchers are using English to talk about the world, and not this ideal and nice world portrayed in the textbooks, but this real world Clarissa was talking about earlier, about inequality, about racism, about discrimination, about peace or not peace. So it is so interesting that we are in this issue overcoming this imposition of seeing English only as a very distant and dry set of structures. So the issues that all these researchers bring are very rich and very deep in the scope and in the way they are, like, as I say, like shaking the field and also repositioning what it implies to teach a language and what is this for.
Let me just emphasize something that I think it speaks to what you were saying. And that's something that sometimes happens within the decolonial studies as well. And definitely something that you have in this issue. You have articles that are about the criticism of the coloniality of English teaching in the South, but there's also articles that are about the, so what we do, what do we do? And there they offer their experiences, their exercises, the readings they have made. So you have both the criticism and sometimes in the same article, but also what to do, right? That I think that speaks a lot about why this is about decoloniality, right? And not just a criticality, right?
Thank you very much. That brings us to our last question. And it is connected to what you were just saying, Gabriela. My question is there a conclusion we can draw from this issue about decoloniality in ELT and what it looks like in practice?
Okay, let me start answering this one then. Yeah, thank you, Doris. These are crucial questions, so thank you very much for them. I think, as I was saying before, I think that one important characteristic of this issue is that it claims for locating ELT and the ELT we do in Latin America. It's not this idea that because it is ELT, it should be European-centered or Northern-centered. What the articles are doing in this issue is they are locating our reflections and our work in ELT within Latin America. We're looking into how teaching and learning English in Colombia and Brazil, for instance, and how this teaching and learning comes up with specific characteristics that are not the mere adaptation of teaching materials coming from Europe or the global North. It's this realization that we need more than this, and that we have been doing more than adapting materials, international materials that come from abroad. Okay, so what I mean is that I think that the articles that have been selected for this volume show how we have actually been delinking from these traditional Euro-centered perspectives in our field about what languages are and about how we have to teach and learn languages. So I think that the articles show that we have been coming up with our own ways to go about these issues of power and epistemologies and ontologies, for example, involved in teaching a colonial language such as English to speakers of other colonial languages such as Portuguese and Spanish, for example. I also think that we can see how then these authors have been developing their decolonial actions / options locally. So many times people look for practice, right, for concrete solutions to the problems they face. But I think that decoloniality has to do with the very devising of these local alternatives rather than solutions. Solutions would have this permanent character that alternatives to me don't have. So they are showing that it's possible to devise these alternatives to our problems, to the issues that we are faced with. And so many of them, if you look at the issue, at the dossier that has been produced, you'll see that many of the papers there are co-authored, which I think is another evidence of how collaboration is important in this universe. So I think that's what would the second part of your question then, Doris, what would decoloniality look like? Gabriela, as I like metaphors, I think of decoloniality here as perhaps a kind of a flexible moving quilt, an assemblage of open possibilities that we can experiment with, that we can try, that we can exercise in our context. It would be, I think, of a sort of a knitting quilt that we can, constantly weave and unweave, depending on how we see the assemblage of things around us. Something else that I think decoloniality looks like is that there is not one single methodology or one theory, but as we mentioned in our editorial as well, there are some tenets that point at this general picture of decoloniality. So they are kind of general objectives and struggles that perhaps unite our decolonial efforts, but how they materialize, how these efforts actually look like in practice depends on each specific situation. So yeah, I think that we have to look differently, and the papers show this, that we have to look differently at the things we have actually been doing, but also to envisage possibilities of alternative ways of doing the things that we have been doing. To listen to the voices that have been silenced, as Carmen pointed out, and Gabriela, and to mainly, I think that decoloniality motivates us, urges us to delink from this rigid perspective on specific methodologies to be applied to, every situation, to specific theories of language acquisition that have not been working, to these external measures of proficiency, to normativities that are imposed on us in relation to how English should or should not be pronounced, be spoken, be written, be normalized. So yeah.
Embracing decoloniality in ELT, at least in Colombia, is very, very recent, and the explorations has just begun. So I think that this issue shows that we can speak up and that we can look at things differently and do things differently, and challenge the traditional ways in which, for example, research has been done, the traditional methods that we have been teaching and taught in our schools of teacher education, that all these truths, normalized truths, can be shaken and can be challenged. And that's something that we see in this issue, that teachers and researchers are feeling empowered to be able to say something, and not like feeling inferior anymore, and that thinking that their knowledge is valid and has a place in all these, as Boaventura also would say, this ecology of knowledges. So that's, to me, that's very important for this issue.
I want to add the onto part, right? Because I think Lena very beautiful talk about why it matters to bring the knowledges, right? Like, but how do decoloniality looks to me? Decoloniality is fleshy, it's carnal, it has the smells and the stains of being grounded in a history and a place. It has, it has a body, and that's something, yes, it's different, but it's different in, very much in this sense of having a body, right? Of being a teacher of English in the body and the history, or this, this term that the colonial people use, locus of enunciation. What that means is that your mind has the body, and that body has a history, right? So the coloniality in that sense looks fleshy, right? And the question of identity, the identity of the teacher, the identity of the student becomes very important, right? And how now the classroom from the get-go is an intercultural exchange, right? So I think that's the conclusion. And I agree with Clarissa that words like conclusions or solutions are sometimes a little difficult to use because they seem to be pointing to something that is now eternal, like done and finished, right? Like, and I think the four of us understand that this is not what is being asked, right? It's more like a direction, right? That we are seeing, that it is polyphonic, and but for me it has those qualities, right? That to reveal the personal, you know, as something that is as important as the knowledge that you have studied in the books. What you know from the body that you inhabit is as important as the epistemic, right? That's why for us, this ontoepistemic that you will find in our introduction, it's so key, right? So that's all.
Well, we would like to ask you many more questions about this topic, but this is all that we have time for today. Thank you very much for this conversation and for all your work in putting together this issue. We are sure that it is going to have a very good reception among the community and is going to help us dissipate many of our doubts about the topic. We also want to thank our readers for their interest in our journal and invite them to visit our webpage, Revista Íkala, at udea.edu.co, and read the 13 studies, pedagogical experiences, and theoretical articles that compose the issue. Thank you very much and goodbye.